It's time for another journey, and today it's my pleasure to chat with Sue Gold, Executive Officer of Border Trust. Sue, hello.
Good morning.
Now, Sue, we love to start. There's so many things to discuss, but we love to start with a simple one, and that is the connection to Albury-Wodonga. We're both here in this time and place right as we are, but what brought you here, Sue?
A fairly convoluted journey, but a pretty exciting one from my point of view. I grew up in Melbourne, and it was about 20 years ago, my husband and I decided to have our tree change, and we left corporate life and secure jobs, as you do, moved to the top of the mountain and lived in Dinnerplain for quite a few years. So we had about 8 years up there. We had a mixed business, total change from what we'd been doing, and then progressively decided that we'd had enough experience on mountain and came down, moved to Myrtleford, and then from there have really sort of decamped to Beechworth. So we now have a few acres in Beechworth, fantastic neighbours, have really settled into that community. And it is through having had quite a few years living there that I've now made my way to Albury as the Executive Officer of Border Trust, and that brings me to this gorgeous end of the town, so now I get the best of Victoria and New South Wales.
Yeah, oh, wonderful. And we're going to get into Border Trust a little bit later, but and first off as well, Beechworth, magnificent. It's God's country in that part of the world.
It's not a bad place to live.
Oh,
yes.
Magnificent. All right, but let's go a little bit further back to when you were growing up. So were you growing up in Melbourne?
I grew up in Melbourne, so I grew up in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. And had what I call a pretty idyllic childhood. So I was really blessed with an extraordinary family who believed in, both for my generation, women being independent and being educated and making decisions in life. So I grew up in a family that was incredibly supportive. I became a nurse, which was very traditional for my generation. You pretty much became a nurse or a teacher or got married. So I chose the nursing option because I could travel with that career. So I had that streak in me anyway to want to care for others. So I did nursing, and I did critical care nursing for 20 years, roughly, almost. So I had a real diverse healthcare background in that setting. I was a clinical nurse, I was a unit manager, an educator, I had a university lecturer role, did some research, pretty much ran out of things that I wanted to do within that sort of clinical immediate healthcare sector, and became more project orientated in my role. By this stage I was working in one of the larger private hospitals, and they were undergoing a lot of change. They'd reassessed the values, how the organisation was going to work on those. So I became a lot more involved in corporate change. And that then became my next sort of career path, was around coaching and consulting and project work around organisational change, and in particular mentoring, and using mentoring as a learning strategy for people within organisations to build their skills, their knowledge and their confidence to work within changing environments. And a number of years ago, as is now, the health sector's pretty dynamic. So having to know how to operate within a space that's constantly different and has demands that change all the time, that became quite important. So I was doing that work just prior to leaving Melbourne. And then with the tree change, that completely stopped. Owned a supermarket, cafe, postal agency,
right.
Bottle shop. It's never a bad thing to own a cafe, supermarket, bottle shop. That was a pretty good inbuilt lifestyle. That was up at Dinnerplain. Again, really small community, great people up there, beautiful environment. We love to ski, but you never ski once you buy a business in the snow.
No, I can imagine. But I just want to go back to the change there is massive. I mean, you're not just talking about the physical change and moving from Melbourne to Dinner Plain, but also, I mean, you didn't go from Melbourne to, say, Albury Wodonga, which still has that little city feel. You went to Dinner Plain, but then total career change as well. Was that a difficult decision to make? Was it off the cuff? Was it really fast, the decision?
It wasn't. It was a fast decision, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. And I guess one thing that I've always known is when I'm ready for change, I'm really clear about it. I know when I'm not doing my best work. So in terms of my career, I've known when it's been time to change. And that hasn't always been radical change, but it's been building on what I know and doing the next thing. And so when it was around leaving Melbourne, it was absolutely the right decision to do. And my husband and I talked about options around taking a year off, taking long service leave, travelling around the world, following the snow, because we both like to ski. And so we went through all these various iterations of what we might do. And we were driving home from Thredbo. We'd been skiing, and there's a bit of a recurring theme here you'll catch on to. And I had a magazine, and we were talking about what might we do if we wanted to go and live somewhere longer term. And my husband just said, oh, well, you need to own a supermarket because everyone needs to eat. And I was flipping through this magazine, and there was an article about Dinner Plain. And we both knew it from summer, didn't think about it as a destination. And I thought, look, Dinner Plain's really lovely. And we started talking about it. The next day, I phoned the real estate agents to tell me about Dinner Plain, and the supermarket was for sale.
Yeah, wow. It's like fate, isn't
it? It was one of those things where we just knew that was meant to be. It was a bit of a tortuous process getting from here's this great opportunity to actually landing the sale. And it was during the 2003 bushfires. So we signed the sale contract, and then within a week, the television crews are at Dinner Plain filming all the rescue services at Dinner Plain trying to put out the bushfire. So every night we got to watch telly to see if the property that we had just bought was still standing.
Wow.
So that was just a little bit of a delay before we actually got there.
Yeah. And what did you learn from the experience of running the store? And how long did you run it for?
We ran the store for a few years. I want to say about 6 or 7 years. Then we leased it for a couple of years, then sold it. I had been lecturing in business strategy, business planning, financials at a corporate level. None of that applies to small business. I think that was number one learning.
Yeah.
So had a good grounding to go back and relearn everything about running a business. But I think that whole opportunity it really reconfirmed that if you have some confidence in yourself and you're willing to learn whatever it is you need to learn, you can do anything. And so it was a massive learning curve. We had some really great supporters that really helped us out. We had, and I'll never forget a customer that was one of our earlier customers when we were first learning how to make coffee, and came back a year later laughing his head off because we'd mastered it and we were still there. and he thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Do you miss it?
No, absolutely ready to do something different. But I think what we really knew that we loved was not living in a big city, that this whole region is just stunning. And so to have great neighbours, great communities, such a wonderful environment, food and wine and whiskey and gin mecca, and we can still go skiing. It's everything that we want, and we would never have got to here had we not taken that big risk and jumped
Yeah.
up a mountain.
Do you go to Melbourne often? And if you do, when you do, are you like me and you can't wait to get out?
Yeah, it's a bit like that. We get to our first set of traffic lights and do groan. My mum's still in Melbourne. Yes, so Dad died a few years ago, so she has relocated. So she lives close to some friends of hers, which is great for her. But she's also in her late 80s. So my sister and I both live up in the northeast. So we go down quite a lot, catch up with Mum, take the opportunity to get her out and about places that she wouldn't otherwise get to, and spend a bit of time catching up with friends or doing things in Melbourne that you just don't get locally. But yeah, we're pretty happy to not have to stay very long.
Yeah, I understand completely. And you met your hubby in Melbourne.
We actually met in France.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, we did a
Is he French?
No, he's Australian.
Okay.
We actually grew up. We didn't meet. I was in my 30s before we met. We grew up literally 2 suburbs apart. Probably spent our teenage youth years doing exactly the same, ice skating, sporting trips, went to the same movies, went to the same concerts, never met. We went to France on a ski trip with mutual friends, met at the, waiting at the airport for the plane, thought, he's all right. And within a week, it was like, he's not getting away. So, and we've been together ever since.
And how did he feel about the tree change? Was he?
Oh, he's all for it. Yes, right. Yeah, absolutely. We're incredibly compatible, complete opposites in some way, but have a real shared vision of the life we want to lead and the work we want to do. So when we had the option to leave Melbourne, it was just a question of, we both wanted to do it, what will we do? Not, do we really want to, or are we both ready? It was easy.
Yeah. All right. So after the shop, you gravitated then towards Beechworth and Albury Wodonga. So let's talk about the journey to Border Trust and let's focus a little on what Border Trust does.
Yeah. So I guess the journey to, I think, being ready to be an executive officer of an organisation like Border Trust is, again, it's been many years in the making. So this is the first time I've been employed as opposed to self-employed for probably 20 years. So once we left Dinner Plain, and in that transition where we knew we were going to, I went back to consulting work. I just did it in the northeast. So I went back into a TAFE role and was delivering diplomas of business and management within the health sector, but locally, so very much workplace learning. I started doing some project work again, and so I was able to evolve much of the work that I had done in Melbourne, deliver it locally. So I got to work in an environment that I loved and got to choose to do the work that I really enjoyed. And that very much became around working with for-profit and for-purpose organisations, but many were connected with health or social services sector. And that was everything from mentoring and coaching of executives and boards, good governance practices, strategic planning, managing change, organisations thinking about how do we remain relevant and exist. A lot of tender and grant writing. So I had a business colleague. We'd worked together and had some great mutual strengths, and we were able to form sort of a good team. So we, with my husband and I, came off mountain and then created new careers. So my husband had been in corporate life and had been a national program manager. He's now a bookkeeper. So he totally reskilled, retrained. So things like that don't scare us, obviously. And it was the work that I've been doing over the last few years which really, I think, really stimulated my interest in the philanthropic sector. and having had a few years working with philanthropic and other not-for-profit groups, learnt a lot about the sector and the way donors are engaged and need to see that their gifts, be that funding or other supports, are actually put to good use.
Yes.
And that there's too many stories around people giving money but never quite knowing where it goes or if it ever does good. And I became a member of the board of the Border Trust over a year ago now. Had known the organisation for years, loved what they were doing, kind of stalked them, but in a nice way, was following their journey, and was lucky enough to join the board and was really settling into that role when Glenys Atkins, who was the executive officer, decided that she was going to step down from that role. And I was ready to step into the chair role of the board, and then the executive officer role became available.
Yes.
So I had a few moments to think about it and said that's what I want, and knew then and there that the executive officer role had my name on it, and I just had to bide my time and hope that the selection committee for the executive officer role also thought the job had my name on it. So it took about 3 months. It was quite a rigorous process, but fortunately I was selected. And Glenys, even better, has stayed on and is now in a community engagement and impact role. So the history and everything that's known is still within the organisation, and everything that she has learnt we're now able to build on. So it's really exciting.
Yeah.
I've loved it.
A lot of people, I'm sure, would have heard of the Border Trust, but may not know exactly how it works. So in simplistic terms, how does it work, and how do you facilitate money going to good causes?
Yeah, so Border Trust is a community foundation. We're a philanthropic organisation, and we have a particular model that we work under, and there are 40 community foundations in Australia, and the intention is that we are local. We cover literally the border, Victoria and New South Wales. We work to pull together funding or other supports from donors, put that, invest it, build interest and earnings to the best of our ability, and then those earnings or the funds directly are then directed as grants to not-for-profit community organisations who then deliver their projects or programs with those funds. And so we have a great relationship with a lot of organisations in community. We know what they're doing, we know the difference they make, we know they're credible. We then connect our donors who might have a particular interest, and we go, great, if that's your interest and they're your values, here's the community group doing that sort of work, and here's a project that they need funding for. We can connect you as a donor to that project and ensure the rigour around that funding. It's tax deductible. So that matters. There's a lot of legislation around how to receive tax-deductible donations, the reporting and acquittal of that. And then we have a lot of rigour around the gifting of those funds as grants into the community. And we work with then the community organisations. We follow the journey of their project.
Yeah.
So we see what they're doing. We have photos, we have videos. We go out and talk with them. We have, reporting and acquittal, again, back to our donors, back to our registration bodies, so that there's lots of checks and balances in place. And because we're local, if people are interested in donating funds that stay local, we ensure that occurs. We have a very minimal fee structure for our donations, and we have a completely separate donation stream where people enable to gift funds to Border Trust to enable Border Trust to exist.
Yes.
And we separate out those things. So we're very, very clear. If you donate to Border Trust to allow Border Trust to operate, we can tell you everything that we do with those funds and you can see it in action. And if you're donating to contribute to community, we can report on that as well. And donors get to meet the recipients. And it's just extraordinary when you bring everyone together, just how rich that experience is.
Yes, and I've seen that firsthand because, of course, we have a partnership, Ace Radio 2AY, Hanbury Foundation grants, and I've been out to a number of them, like Albury Wodonga Food Share, for example, and it is wonderful to see how complete the process is. You know, I mean, it's a beautifully constructed and thought out operation, I think, because it ticks, like you just described there, it ticks every box in terms of what you want when you are a donor, because you want to make sure that the money is going to be used in the right way and be given to the right organisation. And obviously we're hyper local, and partnering with Border Trust means that we ensure that the money stays local, which is just terrific.
Yeah, look, I think it's wonderful. And I mean, we have a very generous community. And I think one of the things that we allow is that kind of individuals and mums and dads and small work groups can give small amounts of money. So at the moment we have our Give 500 campaign where people as an individual or a group can donate $500, which for some people is very doable. For the recipients, that's extraordinary. And so by individuals or groups giving $500, we can pool that money together, and then the donors come together again in November to pitch night to hear a short list of potential applicants and vote on who gets the larger sum, the larger grant to do their project. The runners-up get a smaller amount. But you can guarantee in the room there are organisations there looking to hear the projects, and every year someone gets tapped on the shoulder and they're either given some additional funds, or they're given some mentoring, or they're given some other support that helps their project get off the ground. Yeah. And that's fabulous. And that's the community doing it for themselves.
I can tell that you're so proud of the work that Border Trust does, and obviously the work that you do there.
I love it. I do love it. I work with a great team of staff, great board. You go to work and your job is to do good. And my sort of life motto is have fun and do good. And to have a job where that is actually the job, no one's ever disappointed to see us coming. You know, that's a pretty nice work environment. But yeah, when you get to see the work that people in community are trying to do to help others in community, and you can join the dots between donors and those organisations and then the work that they deliver to help others, it's a pretty nice day at the office.
Yeah. Oh, I can imagine. Now, you mentioned fun there. I want to change tack a little bit and learn a little bit more about you personally. So you have mentioned skiing a number of times just in our 20-odd minutes that we've been talking so far. So I would imagine you like to spend your spare time doing a little skiing?
I do enjoy skiing. I love being outdoors. So that's been somewhat neglected. I've been studying over the last sort of 8 months or so, and that was through, I was really fortunate to receive scholarship. So I've been able to study governance and complete a company director's course. That was thrilling, and that was through the scholarship that made that doable, because that's quite a lot of money. So that's been a distractor, but I do love just being out in our natural environment. So whether it's walking around our rivers, our open gardens. I love gardening, totally neglect my own, but I love going to see what other people achieve. So that's always a good thing. I have a couple of dogs, so being able to wrangle them and go out and, we can do the walks just around our property and be out for half an hour or an hour and still have got out and heard the birds and smelt the air, and it's lovely.
Yeah. If you had your time again, would you do any of it differently?
No, which is not to say everything was sort of fun and games, but I'm a firm believer that everything I've done, including the mistakes I've made, helped me learn, and that got me to where I am now. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. So, no, I wouldn't do things differently, but occasionally I do wish I was a bit wiser at certain times, but that doesn't work that way.
No, exactly. Who do you most admire? I mean, you've worked in a number of very different areas, and I would imagine you draw inspiration from a number of people, but who do you most admire?
Well, in a simplistic way, my husband, because he puts up with me. So I've always got sort of lots of ideas and things I'd like to do, and he's very calming and very supportive, which is brilliant. And I think that's a particular characteristic I admire in anybody. I tend to admire people who have principles that they stick by, and people who are about supporting others. And there's two people that come to mind. One is Al Gore, who, when he was first in American politics and was in the White House, started talking about climate change and was ridiculed. You know, there was a lot of negative press about this kind of weird bloke with these strange ideas. But he knew it was true and he stuck with it. And here we are now going, oh yeah, we did have voices. So people like him that go, there is a truth here, and we just have to keep telling this truth and building that understanding, and not blaming people for not being ready to hear it, but constantly having an opportunity for people to engage, to then create the groundswell. And I think a lot of our really important change in the world occurs by people with that sort of belief, and they are eventually heard, and then it's forgotten because the rest of us know that, and we forget some of the voices that told us. Another person I really admire is Cathy McGowan. And I've known Cathy many, many years. You know, I've seen her in her pre-Parliament times, even then, and then particularly when she went into Parliament. And now Cathy's always believed that you work with others to help them succeed. You know, it's not about self, it's not about my ego, it's that how do I help you so you can do what you want to do. And it's something I've believed in my career, is that the better I am at my job, the more I can help others do theirs and achieve what they want. And I think Cathy is somebody that's been an extraordinary role model around helping others find their power and their voice and be in control of the future that they want. And that as a model for our community, I think is extraordinary.
Yeah. Listening to you over the last half hour, it's pretty clear that you like a challenge and you like doing new things as well. I mean, nobody goes from Melbourne to Dinner Plain and then buys a shop without being able to embrace change. So looking ahead to, say, the next 5 or 10 years, do you think you'll be in the same position in 5 years at Border Trust, or will you seek a new challenge, do you think?
Yeah. I would certainly hope, and I expect to be at Border Trust for at least another 5 years. And I think that's because I think the role is going to evolve. We're an organisation that's got a really great foundation. We've been in operation 18 years, and you don't do that by not doing some things well, and being supported by your community. But we also see a much, much greater need for a community foundation like ours to be able to help really direct funds and support into community, because that's not going to just keep rolling through from government. And there is an opportunity for us to receive funds from government and deliver it locally so that we can ensure it gets to the right organisations and the right people efficiently. So I think we've got a really important role between community helping themselves and building capacity in the community, but also being able to leverage what government does want to spend locally and making sure that that is done well. And so I see Border Trust being in a place of transition. I think we are changing. We want to grow in the sense that we want to be able to have greater funds under investment, have greater funds that we can get into community and can support community groups with their work and help build their capacity as well. So I think there's a lot to do, and 5 years is a reasonable time frame to make some big changes. And so I can see a lot of interest for me, because I think the role will evolve, and I think over time we're going to see the community's need of Border Trust change as well, and we have to stay responsive to that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area. All right, well, we're almost at the end of the journey, but not before a few questions to finish us off. So let's get to the wrap up. If you were able to invite 3 people to your dinner party, alive or dead, famous or not, who would you have at your dinner party, Sue?
For one, I love going to dinner parties. I'm not a big one at hosting them myself, but if I had the choice, I would actually bring together family and friends, and in many ways that's because in my work life and things, I get to meet great people, and so the thing that probably I don't spend enough time on is actually sitting down for a length of time with family and friends, and particularly post-COVID, actually reconnecting in person. And I have friends that are scattered far and wide, and it would be lovely to bring everyone into the one place, face to face. And if I could host a dinner party, I'd make it a weekend, and I would bring people together who I felt would enjoy each other's company, would have some space to do the things that excited them and get up and down from a dinner table across that weekend.
Yeah. Oh, that's a nice answer. And as you mentioned, COVID there, were you here during COVID, as in Albury, Wodonga and Beechworth?
Living in Beechworth, yeah. So quite fortunate. I'm actually quite good at being a bit of a hermit. And so
Perfect.
It was, I think we were in many ways quite blessed. We live on acreage. Both my husband and I have offices that are literally rooms in our garden. So client
Idyllic.
work needed to go online. But yes, I got to work. My work wasn't interrupted. It changed, but I still had it. I got to look out the window at my garden. I could go out and stretch my legs. So in many ways, COVID for me was just hermit time, but I didn't disconnect from people.
Yes.
So quite privileged, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it just impacted everybody in such a different way, didn't it?
Yes.
Sweet or savoury, Sue?
There are no choices. There's both. And you start with savoury, unless you think you might be a bit full, then you have dessert first. And then you have the savoury if there's still room.
I like that strategy. And finally, do you have any good recommendations for us? So this is open to you. It could be something you're reading. It could be something you're watching on telly or on YouTube or whatever. What suggestions for us?
I have a few books that have been with me for, 20, 30 years or more. And there's one I recently picked up, which is a book called Illusions by Richard Bach. And Richard Bach wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull. So for those from many generations ago, it feels like, but 20 or 30 years ago, I think Richard Bach wrote that book, became really quite popular. He wrote another book, Illusions. It's a short story. Effectively, I love it. And there's a quote that he made within that, argue for your limitations and they're yours. And I live by that quote. So if anyone hasn't read Illusions, I suggest getting a copy. It's a joyful book. It's
Wonderful.
Lovely.
Well, Sue Gold, Executive Officer of Border Trust, it's been an absolute pleasure and privilege to talk about your journey. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again when we get to go out and, as part of the Hanbury Foundation grants, give some money to another fantastic recipient. Thank you so much for the chat.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.